Hi, today's lesson is on displacement. This lesson should follow reactivity series. But before we do that, here's a quick retrieval, 5 questions. Pause the video here and have a go at these, please. Okay, let's see how you got on. If we look at the reactivity series, the most reactive metal is potassium. The least reactive metal is gold. Number 3, what would you expect to see if a group 1 metal is put into water? Group 1 metals react with water, forming an alkaline solution and hydrogen gas. What is an ion? An ion is a charged particle. Metals will lose electrons to become positively charged, and non-metals will gain electrons to become negatively charged ions. Why are some metals more reactive than other metals? It's the ability of a metal to how readily can it lose the outer electrons. So something like potassium doesn't require much energy for the outer electron to be lost, meaning potassium is highly reactive. Move on. So like I said, today's lesson is displacement reactions following reactivity series, and the learning outcomes are explain why displacement reactions occur and predict what will happen during the reaction based on the reactivity of reactants. So here's a chemical reaction taking place between a copper and silver nitrate solution. What do you think is happening here? You know it's a chemical reaction taking place. Pause the video here and tell me what you think is happening here. Okay, we know it's a chemical reaction taking place because the colour of the solution has changed. It's gone from colourless to blue. You can also see the copper, the pinky brown colour over here, is no longer pinky brown. So let's have a look why this reaction has taken place. So you had silver nitrate, which was a colourless solution, reacting with copper, and what happened was copper has displaced the silver, and the reason for that is copper is more reactive than silver, so copper can displace silver, forming copper nitrate, and silver is left by itself. Moving on. Here is a word equation we can write. Pause the video here. You've got the reactants. See if you can complete the word equation. Okay, so what you should have had there. And pause the video here again and see if you can write a balanced symbol equation now. Okay, let's have a look. So the balanced symbol equation, you've got silver nitrate, reacting with copper to form silver and copper nitrate. And all we now need to do is balance it. We have 2 nitrates on this side, 2 here and 2 here, and that's balanced. If we move on, displacement reactions can be used to determine if one metal is more reactive than another, as the more reactive metal will displace the less reactive metal. So here's an example. Magnesium is able to displace copper from copper sulphate. Copper is unable to displace magnesium from magnesium sulphate. So what does this tell you? Magnesium must be more reactive. I'd like to pause the video here, copy the table, and in the table, I'd like to put either a cross or a tick. If you think a chemical reaction will not take place, put a cross. If you think a reaction will take place, put a tick. Pause the video here. Okay, so let's have a look. How do you get on? So this is what you should have had. Obviously, no reaction here, and a tick here, and so on. And you can see magnesium will not react with itself and displace itself, so there's no reaction. But if you look at this one, magnesium is more reactive than zinc, so it will displace the zinc from zinc sulfate, so a chemical reaction will take place. And the same reason here, magnesium is more reactive than iron, and magnesium is more reactive than copper. So chemical reactions do take place. However, this one, magnesium is not, sorry, zinc is less reactive than magnesium, so it cannot displace it. Pause the video here, have a look at the rest. Okay, so what I would like to do, please, is looking at these chemical reactions, put the metals in order of the most reactive to the least reactive, and then write word and balance symbol equations for each chemical reaction taking place. So what you should have found is magnesium is the most reactive because it displaces the other metals, followed by zinc, followed by iron, and followed by copper. So pause the video here and have a go at writing word and balanced equations. Okay, moving on. So let's look at the first one. Magnesium plus copper sulfate produces magnesium sulfate plus copper. Magnesium plus iron sulfate, magnesium sulfate plus iron. Magnesium plus zinc sulfate forms magnesium sulfate plus zinc. Zinc plus copper sulfate forms zinc sulfate plus copper. Zinc plus iron sulfate forms zinc sulfate plus iron. And the final one, iron plus copper sulfate forms iron sulfate plus copper. Once again, you can pause the video here and study these. Okay, let's move on then. What you find in a chemical reaction, there are certain ions that will change, and then there are certain ions that do not change. So if we look at this, you have magnesium over here. There it is. And it will change into an ion on this side. You also have copper on this side, which is there. And that copper would change into a copper atom. So it's gone from an ion to a copper atom. And it's there. The other ions, such as this, does not change. And we call this spectator ions. I'd like to have a go at writing ionic equations for the other reactions that took place. You can pause the video here. Okay, so if we have a quick look, there. In the other reactions that took place, the magnesium atom changed into magnesium ion, and so on. You can see that. Okay, pause the video and study this. If we now move on, we've just looked at this. Now then, let's look at this in detail. The magnesium is changing from magnesium atom to a magnesium ion. And it's doing this by losing 2 electrons. This tells us, that number tells us 2 electrons. Losing electrons is an oxidation process. If we look at copper, copper is going from a copper ion to a copper atom, which means this is gaining 2 electrons. Gaining electrons is a reduction process. And then as the magnesium is being oxidized by copper sulfate, we say copper sulfate is the oxidizing agent. And finally, as the copper sulfate is being reduced by the magnesium, we call magnesium the reducing agent. I'm going to repeat the main thing here. Losing electrons is known as an oxidation process. Gaining electrons is a reduction process. Moving on. Have a look at these displacement reactions. You can see the reactants. Just finish off each displacement reaction. Pause the video here. Okay, moving on. Magnesium sulfate plus copper. Magnesium sulfate plus zinc. Zinc sulfate plus iron. No reaction because copper is less reactive than lead, so it's unable to displace it. And then zinc sulfate plus copper. Moving on. A few more for you to have a go at. Pause the video here, and when you're ready, we will move on. Okay, let's have a look at these. Pause the video here, and you can self-assess. Okay, moving on then. And that's the end of this displacement reaction.